really interesting story, and it's illustrative of a lot of, well, both positive and negative trends in the field right now. As Chris said, I've been involved in various aspects of the recovery experience for a number of years. So, getting to the real story at hand, one day my phone rang and I received a phone call from a close personal friend who is the chairman of the Department of Addiction at one of the nation's leading universities, which happens to have the largest collection of early AA and temperance literature. He informed me of a rather astonishing development, that the personal papers of Dr. Bob Smith, one of the two original founders of AA, were available and on the market for sale. I was absolutely stunned at this stage of the game by that development, thinking that they would have been purchased a long, long time ago. You know, I've got something really interesting to tell you about. I received a call today from Dr. Bob's daughter. She said to me that she's got chronic emphysema, she's within 3 to 6 months of dying, she's living in total poverty, and she needs to sell Dr. Bob's original papers. Now, she has been approached by AA, who wanted to pay her very little money and just bury the papers. Her children want to sell the papers piecemeal on eBay. Obviously, it's of incalculable importance that we secure this collection and make it available for researchers. So I said to David, well, what's the situation? And David said, well, I've talked to her and I have an accepted offer of such and such and such and such. I'm not going to go into the money because it's not important. And I said, well, David, I need a little bit of the history because I have to talk to donors. And I have to add that Jim Abernathy, who has many affiliations in the recovery field, was very involved and instrumental also in doing the fundraising to secure the collection. So that said, the real history emerged, which to me at least was quite fascinating. It turns out that when the big book was first published, a deal was struck between Bill, Dr. Bob, the rest of AA, and the publishers. And the deal as it was related to me was as follows: that Alcoholics Anonymous in perpetuity received 90% of the royalties. Dr. Bob and Bill W. were supposed to split the remaining 10% in perpetuity. This all went fine during Dr. Bob's lifetime. However, when Dr. Bob passed away, AA and Bill terminated the arrangement. Hence, Dr. Bob's widow lived and died in virtual penury, and the daughter lived and died in virtual penury. And the neighborhood in which their house was located in Akron is one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in the U.S. And basically, they were poverty-stricken and had no ability to live anywhere else. So that was a bit of an eye-opener to me. However, I have no issue understanding it. Bill had issues like many of us who have personal experience of recovery do, and certainly quite often financial insecurity is one of those issues. Another interesting myth that this history dispels is the fact that AA practices what they call corporate penury. AA is a very wealthy organization these days. The royalties from the big book alone in the early 1960s were over $19 million. One only has to guess how much they've been between now and then. So this is not a poor organization. Now, I think it's a good thing that they practiced corporate poverty in their early days until they got the sobriety and discipline to be able to handle large sums of money. But this myth that AA is some about to go bankrupt corporation is a complete fallacy. Just think how many big books you see out there and understand that everyone you see, they get a piece of money. So, enough said about the history. What was in the collection? Because that's obviously what's of real interest to folks and why it's so important. And I need to go back for 1 minute because there's one very important thing I left out. What extremely important documents is digitizing them and uploading them on the web so that they're for everyone to see. AA's intention was to bury the documents, pick and choose which ones they released, and pick and choose whom they released them to, so that they could shape history.
And I've heard, unfortunately, that's a common practice of it.
A very common practice, and that, of course, is why Dr. Bob's daughter, who was not obviously well disposed to AA in the first place, was in any way inclined to sell them to AA. In fact, she said that she would sell them page by page on a street corner before she sold them to AA. So I think that's a strong statement, but I can understand it under the circumstances. In any event, the real interest here is that Dr. Bob's daughter hand-wrote the rough draft of the 12 and 12. And included in these documents was her handwritten first draft of the 12 and 12. That handwritten first draft has all of the written adds and edits that the original authors of the 12 and 12 collectively added. So it gives one the incalculably valuable opportunity to see how the document was created, refined, and taken from a rough draft into the finished product that we all know and use today. There were numerous other documents of varying interest, including 12 original big books, which, as you all may or may not know,
They're valuable.
Not only valuable, but were red, not blue, the original big books. Last but not least, and perhaps the most iconically valuable item of all, was the coffee pot from the original meeting. And that is going to end up in the Smithsonian, which is where I rightfully feel it should be, because it is a truly iconic piece of American history. So that is the story of Dr. Bob's papers, for what it's worth. And I think that they will be of significant interest, not just to folks in the recovering community, but also students of social movements going forward in the future.
Rick, thank you. That's very interesting.